AI is incredible. It can teach you how to fry an egg and even write a poem, pirate style. Yarr! But it knows nothing about your work. Slackbot is different. It doesn't just know the facts. It knows your schedule. It can turn a brainstorm into a brief. And it doesn't need to be taught. Because Slackbot isn't just another AI. It's AI that knows your work as well as you do. Visit slack.com/meet Slackbot to learn more.
For the News and Observer, I'm Dawn Vaughan, Capitol Bureau Chief and host of Under the Dome. Today, I'm joined by my legislative team colleagues, Avi Bajpai and Luciana Perez Uribe Guinassi. We are almost in October, just on the very end of September now as we record this on Monday the 29th. And there are two major things left unfinished from this past week's very brief General Assembly session. The Senate came back for 1 day only. The House came back for 1 day only. And they really didn't agree on too much other than Irina's Law, the bill that the omnibus crime bill that we talked about the past couple episodes of Under the Dome. So you can catch up on that bill by listening to our past episodes. Today, we're going to focus on these two major things that they didn't get done, which is Medicaid funding and the state budget. And we're going to start with Medicaid funding. Luciana, explain what the situation is and why October 1st is such an important date.
Yeah, so October 1st is this Wednesday, and it's a big date because provider cuts, rate cuts take effect on that day. And that comes from a few months back, just a whole funding issue with Medicaid. So basically, lawmakers provided $600 million for the Medicaid rebase, which is the funding needed to keep provider services running and provider rates well, and just the Medicaid program running smoothly.
And that was part of the July mini budget bill, I think, right?
Yes. So the mini budget bill.
So what now? So this October date is coming from Governor Stein's administration and Department of Health and Human Services, right?
Yeah. So basically, Stein and DHHS, the health department, said that $600 million was not enough, that they needed more funding, about $320 million more, I believe it was. But House and Senate lawmakers didn't agree with that number, but they did agree to provide more funding. But the issue between both chambers was that they wanted different provisions in there. Specifically, the Senate wanted to include funding for a children's hospital being built between Duke and UNC and Apex, as well as for a rural care initiative. The Senate has said that funding was agreed to in 2023, but that they haven't appropriated yet this year. So they wanted to see that included in a Medicaid funding bill. And the House did not want that. And so ultimately they filed their separate bills. They both passed their own versions and they could not come to an agreement on that. So they left last week without, providing that funding and basically leaving the Medicaid rebase unfunded and provider cuts and other Medicaid changes set to take effect on Wednesday.
So, again, the Senate, as you were saying, they passed a bill that had the amount of Medicaid funding the House and Senate agreed on, but the House passed what's known as a clean bill, which means it's only about one thing and nothing else. So the House passed that bill. The Senate passed its own bill that had the money, but also the Children's Hospital. And that's this is tied up in the state budget fight, because the House is not interested in funding the Children's Hospital anymore. And that came as somewhat of a surprise to the Senate. And they're really not very happy about it and wanted to run this tied together to get the hospital funding across the finish line. In a Senate committee, I think it was Senator Grafstein was saying, why are you tying this? Because, it may not happen. And that's just the strategy that Senate Republicans are going to do. So after the House session, Luciana and I were at it's called a gaggle, and a group of reporters stand around somebody and ask some questions with House Speaker Destin Hall. And he said that it's not even as much like the not wanting exactly what the Senate wants for the Children's Hospital. He wants to look at clawing back that money, doesn't think the state needs a new Children's Hospital. So that is a pretty big deal, and something else that the Senate and House are really, another another thing that they're not agreeing on. Avi, what do you think of this as kind of an example of kind of how this session has been, where Senate Leader Phil Berger, House Speaker Destin Hall are really just pretty far apart on some things, and this is the latest example of it.
Yeah, it was striking. I wasn't there for the gaggle with Speaker Hall, but I was catching up on what he said later, and it seemed like he was, if you look at it from the Senate's perspective, he was basically kind of questioning the premise of the hospital in the first place and questioning, like, is this a wise use of funds? Is this necessary? I think he was questioning the notion of a standalone children's hospital in the first place. So it doesn't seem like their negotiating positions are in sync at all on this issue. And I think it's an example of, going into this long session this year, you have two new players at the table. You have Senator Berger, who's been around, but you have Speaker Hall and you have Governor Stein, and that introduces some unknown territory, because you're dealing with new people, and the Republicans, House and Senate, seem to agree on things to a point. So they were able to override, I believe it was 8 vetoes of Governor Stein's earlier this year, but they have not been able to really agree on a whole lot else. Some pretty major sticking points on the budget, on this Medicaid issue. They agreed on the crime bill, but they pre-negotiated that amongst themselves. That wasn't really aired in kind of public view or public discussion.
Right. When they announced together, Berger and Hall announced together that they were going to pass that, and that goes pretty quickly, So they did find common ground on some things.
And the other thing that was interesting this past week was they weren't even really crossing paths kind of physically. Like, the Senate was there, they had their predetermined agenda, what they were going to do, what they were willing to do, and they were there on Monday, and then they were out of there. And the House was there on Tuesday, so there wasn't even really much kind of time for, we passed this and then we're going to negotiate this and change this, amend this, whatever. It was just kind of fixed from the get-go. So
a lot of times, an average legislative week, reporters will go back and forth between Berger and Hall, and even if they're not talking, they almost talk through us, right? Because we'll say, well, the speaker said this, the Senate President Pro Tem said that, and what's your response? And it was very, very separate. There was no back and forth at all.
Yeah, I mean, changing a little bit, there was also some friction between the governor and then the legislative chambers on the Medicaid issue. Both sides sought to kind of pin the blame on the other. So lawmakers also said that, it was unprecedented that that the governor and DHHS take this kind of action to cut those provider rates. And they were saying it was politicizing the Medicaid issue. And then on the flip side, the governor said, as Governor Josh Stein also said, that they were, not taking action and putting people's politics over healthcare, so to say. So it's interesting also to see that there was some friction there in a relationship that I think has been fairly not too tense so far.
Right. A big difference than former Governor Roy Cooper. Berger and Hall seem to get along with Stein better, I think. And then another thing that Hall said that he told reporters is that he thinks this October 1st date is just one that Stein and DHHS picked and can certainly change, and thinks that there is enough money. So, as we're recording this Monday, we don't know if there'll be some deal before October 1st. But right now, what are the very first things that'll happen if there is no deal or change on the date, Luciana?
So I think a lot of that still has to kind of play out if these cuts actually come. But what I've heard, of course, is the main thing is if provider cuts to what doctors and providers who accept Medicaid patients is lowered, then they might accept less Medicaid patients, and that could affect patients not having access to their providers, to the care they usually have. And these cuts are across the board. So it's 3% cut across the board, but some other providers have steeper cuts all the way up to 10%. So that's pretty significant. So yeah, I think it'll be a matter of how it plays out down the line. And also I've heard even potentially layoffs in some of these, centers and some of these providers and some of these locations, as well as closures. But again, I think it's going to kind of have to play out in the next few months if this actually happens.
Okay, so I'm sure a lot of people in healthcare are paying close attention to all of this. We've got to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about what's left undone from the General Assembly, including no state budget deal yet. We'll be right back.
Get in the game with the college-branded Venmo debit card. Rep your team with every tap and earn up to 5% cash back with Venmo Stash, a new rewards program from Venmo. No monthly fee, no minimum balance, just school pride and spending power. Get in the game and sign up for the Venmo debit card at venmo.com/collegecard. The Venmo MasterCard is issued by the Bancorp Bank N.A. Select schools available. Venmo Stash terms and exclusions apply at venmo.me/stash terms. Max $100 cash back per month.
Not sure how to tackle your taxes? Are you sweating the small print? You may be experiencing FOMO, the fear of messing up. The answer? Using TurboTax on Intuit Credit Karma. They help you get your biggest refund, and then we help you do more with it. With a personalized plan designed to help you hit your money goals. It's time to take your taxes to the max. Start filing today in the Credit Karma app.
You're listening to Under the Dome. I'm Capitol Bureau Chief Dawn Vaughan, here with Avi Bajpai and Luciana Perez Uribe Guinassi. Before the break, we were telling you about the latest on this Medicaid fight, and the House and Senate couldn't agree, and we're coming up on October 1st deadline. But things may change even by the time we record this on Monday. And then when you're listening on Tuesday morning, also, Avi, want to make sure we point out is the Council of State meeting, which is the Council of State for people who aren't familiar with it. Other states don't have councils of state. It's the 10 statewide elected officials, which includes Governor Stein, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, secretary of state, auditor, treasurer, a lot of different statewide commissioners. So and they all meet for about an hour once a month or so. And they have reports. Really, the only work they do together, other than certain things around like executive orders where they have to agree, are property matters. And that sometimes that's a big deal. A lot of times it's a minor deal. But at the end of the meetings, they will go around and share things. And that's usually where it gets pretty interesting. It's some sort of update or report. Sometimes it's business news from the Secretary of State. Elaine Marshall always shares that. It could be things coming from the state auditor, Dave Bullock, who actually we had already decided our headliner, so I'll throw that out there now, that the Board of Elections now has Dallas Woodhouse, a longtime political operative, working in that area. So that's something more that we'll be covering in the weeks and years to come. But anyway, let's get back to the General Assembly and what they didn't do. There still is no comprehensive state budget. They passed, they being the House and Senate, passed one mini budget this past week that has, most notably for people, paying attention, like the less in the weeds things are, there's some Chantel money, but there's a lot of money for millions of dollars for infrastructure around the Lenovo Center, which used to be called VNC Arena, and the Sports and Entertainment District, which is really an area of Raleigh that is set for a lot of change in the future, and this gives them some more money. So we'll see what else goes on over there. Again, here we are with another budget fight. It's different players, different issues. Avi, you were talking about how it's shaped up this session, really. And I'm interested to hear both of y'all's thoughts on how Berger and Hall interact and how we'll see that change. You'd mentioned, Luciana, that in 2023, there was an agreement with this hospital funding, and there's also an agreement on future tax cuts, which was another one of their big, I guess, disagreements would be the way to describe it.
Yeah, I mean, just from observing how this process has played out so far, comparing it to how it's played out in the past when it was Berger and then Speaker Moore, I think this year what we're seeing is the positions that both sides are coming to the table with are just it seems far apart. Like there's just not a lot of scope for productive negotiating. I mean, I'm just saying this, watching it from the outside. We don't know how talks go on the inside, of course, but you mentioned the whole issue of when future tax cuts go into effect and how to that was kind of decided in place under a previous budget, and this whole question of like, should that be revisited? So that seems like a pretty fundamental part of your budget plan and your kind of policy, just general policy for the state. So if there's not agreement on that, it seems to explain why we've one of the big reasons why we're in September without a budget, and usually or at least ideally you want them to have it by July 1st.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with everything Avi said. I'd add, I think it feels like they are talking less. In past years, it just kind of felt like they were having more conversations, or you would hear rumors about them getting together or top appropriations chairs and such. And I'm sure that's happening to some extent, but it's quieter, I'd say, than in past years, and seems to be a lot more each side set on their positions, like the taxes, the Children's Hospital, and other things like that.
Yeah. And I mean, I knew in the House and Senate it would just kind of go back and forth over the total spend number, which is a lot different than what do you want your future tax policy to be. And again, just to explain, there's another individual income tax rate reduction this coming year, but these are looking at future tax cuts and different revenue triggers. And really just Berger and Hall seem really far apart on this now. This past week, they did not meet just about the budget. They had the big chairs, which means like the top chairs of their each chamber's appropriations committees, to talk about things, but there really doesn't seem to be much movement. And really, it's important to note what's at stake here there were step increases for teachers in the July mini budget. The Senate passed the bill this past week that would have significant raises, really, for a lot of law enforcement officers, which was also what was in their original budget plan. The House did not take that up. Speaker Hall also told reporters that raises is another thing there, and the House wants to do more for raises than the Senate does. And that's kind of a perennial fight, just as far as them agreeing on that amount. But raises are something that's being held up. Another thing that's, raises would be a positive thing, I think most people think, but maybe a negative thing for some state employees are that there are job cuts in these both budget proposals. So when there is a budget, it's not just going to be raises, it's also going to be job cuts and whatever else they decide to cut if they have a big deal, which they may not have. They'll be back October 20th again for 4 days in November and 4 days in December. And we'll see what happens with that. Another thing, I've got a story coming out soon about retired state employees and the impact of just this sort of budget uncertainty. So, which has become kind of the certainty is that the budget is uncertain, and what that actually means for people's daily lives. All right. Well, we are close to running out of time. Let's make sure we have time to talk about our picks for Headliner of the Week. I'll go first since mine's serious, and we usually end on lighter ones. Mine is the Helene anniversary. And, there's just been a lot of coverage from us at the News and Observer and our colleagues, the Charlotte Observer, a lot of other media that have just really taken a look at the long-term impacts and telling people stories and everything. So I'm sure you can see a lot of read a lot of coverage, everything you want to hear about that. Then also our photographers had before and after photos of the damage there. And that's a really visual way to see how things have changed in a year. So you can see all our coverage there. All right, Luciana, switching gears here. I'll go to you. What's your pick for Headliner of the Week?
Well, it's not a major one, but just movie season. It kind of feels like movie season to me when it gets colder, or at least it's rainy, and October, November, and holidays rolls around. I just want to watch horror movies and go to the actual cinema. So yeah, just enjoying that kind of shift in vibe as the weather changes.
I know. It's like it's all of a sudden with the storm and leaves like falls here, I guess. So, all right, Avi, what's your headliner?
I can appreciate Luciana's thoughts on like movie season rolling around at this time of year, but I will say that movies are good any time of the year for me. But specifically, I'll go with the movie Inception, which I just watched for the first time. Watched it in the theater a couple of weeks ago, and for the last couple of years, I've been really getting into, exploring like different directors. But one of them is Christopher Nolan, and I'm diving into his filmography. I loved Inception. I thought it was very entertaining, very compelling drama about something that's kind of interesting premise, and he has this ability to you can just escape into his movies, and it's great. So watch Inception if you haven't.
I haven't watched it.
Tops differently now.
Yeah.
I watched on one of the streaming services. It was called My Oxford Year, which I don't know about the plot really, but the scenery. It was filmed at Oxford.
I think I've seen seen it on there, but I haven't seen it.
Or the Oxford, but maybe that's about it. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. For the News and Observer, I'm Dawn Vaughan with Luciana Perez Uribe Guinassi, Avi Bajpai, and producer Laura Brache. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.